Hey everyone, welcome back to lab section for this week. In today's lab, we're going to be going over a past exam problem, so you guys can not only get a little bit of review before your midterm, but also just brush up on some programming concepts that will be really important for future projects and just your future as a programmer in general. So this problem that we're going to be covering covers a variety of topics, including writing functions, dealing with user input, loops, in particular, the difference between for and while loops, and also conditional statements. So these are your if, else statements. So the problem reads as follows. Complete the header and definition of the guessNum function, which takes in an integer and prompts the user to guess the number until they guess correctly. This function does not return anything. So also note that this problem includes two helper functions, the toHigh prompt and toLow prompt. So these are basically void functions that prompt the user for another guess if their original guess is incorrect. And then this is what the problem is going to look like. You're going to fill in these blanks in the function header and then also write the definition. So let's start with the function header. So we noted that this function returns nothing, so this entails using the void keyword in the header. So instead of returning an int or a double or a boolean, we're going to be returning nothing, so this is the void keyword. This is what that does. And then also it takes in an integer as a parameter. And here I want to stress using descriptive variable names. So for example, we could call this integer like int n, int x, but these variable names don't tell us anything about what that variable actually holds. So a more effective variable name would be something like int target, so the target number that we're trying to guess. So this is what that header is going to look like, void, and then also use that target variable name for the parameter. So next we're going to deal with user input. So in any input problem, we want to prompt the user for input so that the user actually knows when to type into the keyboard. So we want to make a variable to store the input after prompting the user. So again, I wanted to stress using descriptive variable names. So here we're going to call it guess because this is the number that the user is going to be guessing. And then for the input itself, we're going to be reading from cin. So we use the extraction operator, which is these two angle brackets. And a pro tip I want to give you guys is the direction of these angle brackets actually kind of show where the data is going. So we're extracting from cin and going into that guess variable. So those arrows kind of point to guess. So that's kind of just a way you can remember. So sort of the main idea of this problem is we're prompting the user over and over for a guess until they guess that correct number. And when we hear these words, we immediately need to think about using a loop because we're essentially executing the same body of code over and over again until some condition is met, which is the whole idea of a loop. And we also need to consider whether we're using a while loop or a for loop. So for loops are useful for when we know how many iterations of the loop we want to go through. But in this case, we don't know when we want to exit the loop because we want to keep going until the user inputs the correct guess. But we have no idea what their guess is going to be. So when we're writing our program, we have no idea what the user is going to input. So we use a while loop. So we write while the guess does not equal the target parameter. So while the guess is incorrect, we're going to prompt the user again for the next guess. And then from cin, we're going to read in their next guess. And we're going to keep going until they guess the correct number. So note that if their initial guess was correct, then we would ignore this while loop completely and skip to the next part of the code and go from there. The last topic we need to cover to finish this problem is conditional statements. So to do a quick review, conditional statements are used for when we need to execute a block of code only if a certain condition is true. So in this problem, when we enter our while loop, we have two possible conditions. Either the guess was too high or the guess was too low. So we're going to write if that guess variable is less than the target number, we're going to call our toLow prompt function, our helper function that was included in the problem. So this is going to prompt the user for the next guess, then the user would input their next guess. And then the only other option is that the guess was too high. So we say else, and notice that we don't need to use an else if because there's only two options here. If the guess was not correct, it could only be too low or too high. So we say else, and then we call our toHigh prompt function, which is going to prompt the user again for their next guess, and then the user would input their next guess. And we keep going until they guess the correct number. So putting everything together, here's sort of a solution that I came up with, or that I put together. So here's the header of the function, what we started with. So we know that the function returned nothing, so we use that void keyword. And then we also covered sort of using descriptive variable names. So we called this target as opposed to just int x or int n or something. The next topic we covered was user input. And I gave you that pro tip of using the extraction operator. So the arrows sort of point to where the input is going. So we're reading from cin and going into the guess variable. The next thing is the while loop. So we use a while loop because when we're writing our code, we don't know what the user is going to be guessing. We don't know the exit condition depends on the user input, something that is unknown. So we use a while loop. So while the guess is incorrect, we're going to execute this body of code. We're going to prompt the user over and over again until they guess the correct number. So once they guess the correct number, we're going to print that they guessed the number. So that pretty much covers everything. Thank you so much for listening. I know we covered a lot in today's lab, so if you have any questions, feel free to come up after class. I will be holding a little bit of office hours, or just shoot me an email whenever you feel like at shopseb@umich.edu. Thank you.